I'm going to start off this video with another confession. If you saw the one before when I was putting the warp onto the loom, you saw that I was having trouble with the paper. And I said I probably should have redone it, but it probably wouldn't make any difference. Well, that was one of the kind of things that I know would make a cumulative error over time. So I did re-wrap it with the paper so it's much more smooth now, much more even, much more consistent. So now I'm going to take the other end, and that was on the looping peg, on the warping peg, and put it on the front of the loom, on the, we're going to tie it onto the beam here. And so this is where things get a little hairy, and I start cutting. But that's fine. You got to do it sometime. You just, if you can at all avoid it, try to have, keep the loom from falling over and the reed from falling off and all the yarn going back through, because that would be very, very sad indeed. And that's why you want to use a highly contrasting yarn, because it highly contrasts. I've got my little tray with my goodies, so I've got my scissors, and I'm gonna get going. I mentioned before that there would be opportunities to correct any warps that aren't tight enough, if they for some reason didn't get tied on correctly in the back or something like that. And you can use that, you can do that by using a loom weight. I made these. I like to do a lot of hacking for materials, and if I find something later on is a little loose on the side, I can put my little loom weight, which is a pharmacy vial with a hook and some keys in it, right in the back, and it'll hold it taut. So you can go out and buy some loom weights, or you can make your own. Some people use shower curtain hangers. I think that's a little bit, it doesn't stay placed, so I like something that actually has some heft to it. And more of the boring stuff. What I like to do is just start in the middle and tie it in about 1 inch or so bundles onto the rod, the tie rod here, because that will help keep the tension focused, or keep the tension focused, keep the tension tense, keep the tension wound up. And if you do it in small increments, you can isolate if you have any problems pretty quickly and repair them. To start, what I do is I just tie a surgeon's knot at the top, and then I'll go and do the next bunch. And I like to alternate it just to try to keep things fairly consistent in terms of the tension. But I'll go through at the end and retighten them and then tie them in a bow, so I can, if I need to fix them later on, I can do that too pretty easily. And surgeon's knot is just making one loop and then two and then pulling it. I don't know if that makes it a surgeon's knot or a surgeon's half knot or what, but it's a pretty good way of keeping the yarn tied in place, but it will also help you untie it easily, which is key, because as we saw in the last video, there's a lot to that you might have to readjust or do over. And I've said it before and I've said it again, I will say it again, I'll say it now, that one of the reasons I totally believe that it might have taken Penelope, Odysseus' wife, 20 years to weave her stole to keep her suitors at bay was because she had to undo stuff and redo it. And of course that wasn't, I'm sure she was a fine and excellent weaver, but if she invited one of the guys up to watch her weave, they're like, yeah, no, that's right, she's got to take 20 years to do this. That's cool. Now, before I go through and check them, I'm going to take my watch off, which I should have done in the first place, and that's a good place to talk about ergonomics. I'm taking my watch off because I notice that my wrist gets tired when I'm doing this, and even a small weight like a watch can make a big difference. You'll notice I've got my light here because when you're dealing with colors that are as similar as these are to each other, before you wash them and they become brighter, light helps, and specifically when you're working with very fine yarn. So it's a good idea to have a really good adjustable light source. And the other thing is, I have pillows beside me just to keep my posture good, because you have to pay attention to these things when you get to be a certain age, and you should even pay attention to them when you're younger than that. So next thing I'm going to do is tighten these up. I'm sort of patting them and seeing which ones are looser. Okay, and then I'm just going to finish tying it with a bow, because again, that's something that's easy to undo. So if I find that I've made a mistake in the course of weaving, it'll be easy enough to fix, and when I get to the end and I have to remove it, it'll be easy to remove. Remember what I said before about a yarn under tension being a yarn under control. And these are already on the way to being reasonably well controlled, which is kind of the goal of things. I've got everything tied up now, and you'll notice that the bows at the end of the strings are all triangles, and they should be as square as these are at the top here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take some of my ugly gray yarn that I showed you before, and I'm going to use that to space the threads out so they will be more square to each other. They'll all be perpendicular. And that is a good time to talk about shuttles. Most people think of shuttles as looking something like one of these guys, and you see pictures or video folks zooming them through. Not a whole lot of zooming, but they are incredibly useful. But there are different types, and they serve different purposes. And sometimes it's just a matter of what you enjoy using, what you're comfortable with. But see, it has a little peg for the bobbin to go on. It goes right on here, and you can see that the string will pull, the yarn will pull freely once I have that set up properly. And then there's also a stick shuttle. And stick shuttle is useful if you're using a thicker yarn, a bulkier yarn. The boat shuttle, I find, works better with a thin or a fine yarn. And so I'm going to start with this. And see, remember what I said before about the reed and the rigid heddles keeping everything in place, and now I've moved it, and so I have half the threads underneath and half above. So I'm going to take the ugly gray yarn, trademark, and I'm going to pull it through, and then without beating it down, I'm going to change the height, swap which threads are at top, and run through again. And I don't want these to be tight here because I don't want that to be pulling the threads in. I'll place it to the top. And run it through. And now that I have 3, I am going to beat it all down. With any luck, these threads the yarns will spread out and be much more parallel than they were. And you can see that they're getting there. We still have some spaces here, some pulling here, and so I'm going to have a couple of passes with this. Hello, small beast. This is Zoe. You'll remember her from the last video. I'm just doing the same thing again, doing 3 passes of the yarn, and then I'll beat it down. Sounds vicious. We have beating, we have slaying. One gets rather warped. I suppose if you had to do this all day, 12 hours a day, many days out of the year, you'd probably come up with inventive and violent language too. That happens quite frequently. There is a story I read once when I was looking at... That is much better. Oh, goodbye, cat. When I was reading about weaving in Salem, Massachusetts during the age of when Salem was a very important shipping port, women would write in their diaries about how they were going mad from having to weave so much for canvas or for things that were useful in a shipyard. And I can imagine doing this by candlelight or just by daylight, which would be ideal, but then you don't often get time to weave during the day. Oftentimes you're doing other things during the day when you have the light outside. So you'd be doing a lot of this by candlelight and firelight. And I am very glad to have my very specific directional lamp there. So I'm going to very carefully move this forward a little bit. And it's looking reasonably even. I might do one more pass with this, just because there's a little curly bits in here. And that's a good thing to remember too, is that I like doing this because it is fun for me, but if I had to do it all the time, it would probably be a real drag. Or if I had to do it all the time and my labor didn't even belong to me, it would be a whole different story. So it's a quite different thing when you have the luxury to learn something new on your own and do it, but I think it pays to remember that this wasn't always a pastime, it was a necessity of life. In order to keep your household going, in order to make some money if you were an unmarried woman or a widow, it's one of the few options open to you. So I've got the warp spread out, I'm pretty happy with that. And then we get to another bit. Because I'm making napkins, I want to leave a space at both ends of each napkin for a hem. And if you use something like ordinary sewing thread, you'll have a much finer hem than if you just use one or a strand of this cotton yarn that I've been using. The thing about that is that it takes a while to warp to weave. It takes a while to weave a thread that fine, but it's worth it in the end. And so I'm going to get started with my boat shuttle and do 1.5 inches. And this is where it might have paid off for me to use the stick shuttle instead, because it might be too heavy for this. But let's see. I can tighten this up. And I'll tighten that up. See if it goes any better. Otherwise, I will switch it to being a stick shuttle. And as with anything, I find the first couple of throws are the toughest, because you're still making sure that everything's reasonably well balanced. One thing I should point out was that I was showing you the cones of the cotton yarn that I'm using from last time, and those were organic cotton, organically dyed, called American Maid, M-A-I-D, and I got them, they're a yarn company, a yarn that's put out by the Lunatic Fringe folks, and I'm doing a variation on their sampler kit to make napkins, and I've had good luck with that, and I like using this yarn, so I like to give credit where credit's due. I always have a little container because there will be a lot of ends of thread, and by the end of a project I will end up filling up an old bread bag with bits of yarn that are too fine for me to use on anything else. If they're long enough, I can try recarding them. If I have a bunch of wool, for example, I can take two carding cards, hence the name, and try to turn them into a recycled piece of yarn. Otherwise, I take the scraps that are too small for that, and I take them to a textile recycling drop-off point. The other thing I do is when I have long threads, as I will at the end, with what's called Loom Waist, the ends where I was tying it on to the loom, there's going to be always a little bit left. Those are long enough so that I could use them for when I'm making skeins of yarn. I can tie them, I can use them, these ends, to tie them so they will keep untangled. And they're the perfect length for that, so I like to try to minimize the waste here. And I finished making my hem part. Yay, we're almost at the weaving part. And I will put the shuttle out of harm's way and just wrap this around here. And even before it's wound all the way on, it's hanging in there pretty good, so that's going to make life a lot easier. and that's the first I've done. A couple things to mention here. One is that when I was learning to throw the shuttle, I realized that with this loom anyways, with the rigid head loom, it makes sense if you can do it with a sort of flicking motion and aim it up so that it sort of banks off the rigid heddles, and that helps it keep its little nose up so it doesn't go diving through the bottom of the warp, which makes a great deal of noise and makes me extremely irritated because I do it so often. And the next thing I'm going to do is the same I did when I was making the weft. I'm going to change out my bobbin so that it has 3 stripes of the white, or 3 picks of the white. And once I've got my 3 picks of white, I'll switch off and go to the next color, which is the light brown. Now, all I have to do is that whole pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times 3, and magically, after that, I'll have 3 napkins. And what that will look like when I'm done is this. It's always fun to pull it off the beam because it's suddenly you have fabric and you have a textile and everything. And you can see that I have the spacing yarn and the loom waist here. You can see I've got the hems here, and I've got my napkin and the other hem. And this is all going to shrink quite a bit, and the color is going to change too because of the particular type of dye I use on these. But I will have a set of 6 lovely napkins with lots of drape and everything, and that will be very happy. I mentioned before that a lot of my interest in weaving comes from not being able to knit and not being good at it and splitting yarn and getting upset. But one of the things I really love about this is that although there's a lot of initial setup, I can weave 7 or 8 or more inches in an evening, which is really satisfying, really gratifying, because within the space of a couple of weeks you can have, you know, a scarf. In 1 week you can have a couple of napkins in a couple, 2-3 weeks, and that is incredibly satisfying. Really makes me very happy. It's not one drawback is that you can't weave and watch a movie with subtitles at the same time, so you pretty much have to stick with stuff that you're either familiar with or something that you can turn your attention away from every couple of a minute or so. And that's what I like about this, is that suddenly you have something that you've made, and it only takes a couple of inches for you to start to understand what it's going to look like and how it's going to end up, and that is, again, incredibly satisfying. I am going to swap bobbins, and then I will continue on my way, and I'll see you in the next video where I'll be talking about spinning, because my ultimate goal was not only to weave things, but to be able to spin the yarn to go into weaving. And that was a whole different adventure, a whole different set of skills. And just when I felt like, okay, I'm getting this weaving thing, I threw the spinning onto it, and it was an adventure. It still is an adventure. It hasn't been that long. So, thanks, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi, this is Dana Cameron. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and to click on the bell icon so you get notifications. If you'd like to support me as a writer and creator, there are links to my books with information about them below. You can order them from your favorite bookstore or your favorite ebook retailer. Thanks again.